Hello, dear friends. I am recording today from Bucharest, Romania, where I'm here for some lectures. Um, I'd like to talk about, even though we just read Parshat Ki Tisa, and we're approaching Parshat Vayakhel Pudei, I'd like to talk about the structure of the book of Shmot, the book of Exodus, because there are things to learn just from the structure of the book. Remember, Sefer Breshit ends off with the people of Israel going down to Egypt. So at that time was the tribe of Israel, 70 people. So the book of Shmot, which is also called Sefer HaGeulah by the Ramban, Book of Redemption, and I guess also its Greek word Exodus also recalls that. You might say that's the first part of Sefer Shmot. So the first three parshiot, Shmot, Va'era are telling the story both of the slavery and the Exodus. And it's Bo, where the Exodus happens at midnight after eating the Paschal offering when the Jews leave at the crack of midnight with their unleavened bread, and they leave in haste. So that's the first part, the slavery and the Exodus. The Exodus was needed already from the end of Breshit, because when they went to Egypt, Joseph says to his brethren, Pakod yivkod Elohim etchem, God will remember you to take you out, meaning, and take my bones with you when you leave this place. And that's exactly what Moses does. When they do leave in Parshat Bo, he takes the atzmot, the bones of Joseph, with him because of the promise that Joseph made his brethren Hamasim. It's, of course, mentioned in the beginning of Bashalach, but this happens in Bo. So that's part one. Part two are parshiot that I've talked about before. The next three parshiot, which is Bishalach, Yitro, and Mishpatim. And these are very, I would say, these are almost like three bases of the Jewish people. Even though Bishalach continues the story after they've left Egypt with Pharaoh's army running after them. And of course, the splitting of the Red Sea. But as I said, as a principle or an element that is going to take itself with us, or something we have to take with us from this story, as I mentioned in an earlier talk, Bishalach is also the parsha where the people are able to bear testimony to God's involvement in human history, something which normally the people cannot see. And this is when I talked about Tashiv Chalaya Mashalo Rabbi Yechezkel Buzi, that what the Mechalta says, the Midrash, that the simplest of Jews saw at the splitting of the sea something that the prophet Ezekiel did not see. And at the time, I asked the question, what does that mean? You should say the simplest of Israelites at Sinai saw things that Ezekiel didn't see. Why at the splitting of the Red Sea? And the way I interpret it is that it's Sinai is when we're given the Torah. It is, of course, a revelation towards the whole people. We're given the principles of the Torah. It starts with the Decalogue, but all the rest of the principles will come. And this is the idea that God is interested in morality and in spirituality. That's what they learned in Sinai. What they learn in Parshat Beshalach at the sea is that God also doesn't like evil. And God will be there to stand behind the scenes because we have free will, but is watching from behind the scenes. There is divine providence, even in a world that sometimes appears that there is not. And most of the time, as human beings, we are not evident. This is not evident, and we are not able to witness it. But they had to witness it at the sea. That moment of freedom, when Pharaoh, who ran out of Egypt, sinks with his army, and they are at this moment actually free, not just leaving Egypt. Because this they have to take with them, because there will be many times when they would like to see this and it won't happen. So, Bishalach is the idea of divine providence. Yitro is the idea that God wants human beings to live a moral and spiritual life, and this is the Decalogue this is given, which encapsulate this idea in it, but of course explained by Moses over the 40 years through the giving of the Torah, like it says in Gittin, page 60, that the Torah is given piece by piece over the 40 years. And then, of course, you have Mishpatim. Mishpatim is a just society. It's also interesting that basically almost all the laws in Mishpatim are laws between man and man, ben adam lechavero. It's about building a just society. Because as Jews, when we're given the Torah, the first basis is a just society. Because derech eretz kadma la Torah. The idea of being a moral human being comes before the giving of the Torah. What does that mean? It's a midrash in Vayikra Rabbah. I think it was 9:3. And the midrash says, derech eitz hachayim. The midrash claims that when it says derech eretz kadma la Torah, that the moral life was given before the Torah, it even refers, the simple meaning is that the patriarchs or the matriarchs who walked in a just way lived before the giving of the Torah. So derech eretz, morality, came before the Torah. However, the Midrash takes it even further back and learns it from the verse when Adam and Eve are kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And there it says, derech eitz hachayim, that the cherubims with their swords closed the road to the tree of life. And the Midrash says, what does it mean, the road to the tree of life, which is derech eretz? Derech eretz. It says derech eitz hachayim, the road to the tree of life. So the Midrash says derech, that's derech eretz, morality. The tree of life, that's the Torah. To tell you that morality is the first step before the Torah. This is also echoed in the writings of Rabbi Kook, who says that there are two levels in the Torah. We have the natural level of morality, which a person can also understand by their own intuitive logic, as Immanuel Kant mentions, by a priori thinking, prior to trying to, it comes naturally to us. And then there's the second level, which he calls Musar HaKodesh, which is the spiritual or sanctified level of ethics, which is not something which is intuitive or self-evident, and the Torah presents it to us, but we have to understand what it means, but we do it even before we understand what it means, because it's to train us to certain sensitivities. Rabbi Kook also has an interesting article about some of these sensitivities in his article called Talalei Orot. So these are the next three parshiot. God's providence, B'Shalach, bearing testimony, the giving of the Torah and Yitro, which is the Decalogue, which means God's plan for human beings, to help them be both moral and spiritual, and Mishpatim, the just society. Then we have the parshiot at the end. They are 4 and 5, I call them. And the parshiot at the end, of course, you have Tuma Tetzavet, is talking about commands of setting up tabernacle, which is a forerunner of the temporary temple. And of course, what we're going to be reading next, Shabbat Vayalka Pekude, which is actually carrying out these commands, including also the clothing of the Kohanim, etc., and the various vessels in the temple. And in the middle, you have Kitisa. Now, this sandwich of 4 parshiot with a parsha in the middle, of course, Kitisas, all the parshanim, like Rashi says, is out of place. Kitisa, the sin of the golden calf, should have been right after Parshat Yitro, which talked about the Decalogue. So why is it happening specifically at this point? Kitisa. Well, first of all, you don't want to ruin the story. The Israelites got the Decalogue. Why ruin the story by telling such a negative thing at the same time? But it is told. And there's a few meanings to that. Number one, the reason why it's a sandwich. Some people explain that maybe the very fact that we needed something physical, which was Chet Egel, as Rabbi Yehuda Levi says, that they lived in, the people of Israel lived in Egypt for such a long time that they were influenced by Egyptian culture. And Egyptian culture, which believed in 33 gods, had all these icons that they prayed to. So even though the Israelites knew that there's only one God, but before it was Moses was the mediator. Now who's going to be the mediator if he didn't come back? Now that the 40 days seems to be done. So right away, according to Rashi, it's the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, but obviously it was a small part of the people, because we know when these people, when we know that then the golden calf was built and then Moses comes and destroys it. He says, who is with me? Mi Lashem alai, whoever is with God, come to me. And all the tribe of Levi come to him. And he says, okay, I want you to kill all those who were involved in the golden calf, and there were 3,000 people. Now, the people came out of Israel, as we know from the book of Numbers. There were 600,000 men from the ages of 20 to 60. Then, of course, there are children and women, at least 1.5 million people, possibly more. So if 3,000 were the ones involved in the sin of the golden calf, that's a very small number. But I guess the rest just stood and watched and wondered. Very often, a small group of people can create a ripple effect. And all the people eventually are punished for the sin of the golden calf, even those who did not take part, because they stood by silently. So Yehuda Levi claims that in that sense it was understandable, but it was still a small part of the people who did it. And Rashi tries to claim as the mixed multitude, for them it would have been natural, because they didn't originate with the people of Israel. But anyhow, so getting back to this, you have then Kiti Sad, and it's stuck in the middle. And it's there, and the surrounding parshiot about the temple, about the tabernacle, give the feeling that they wanted something tangible, so God says, okay, here is something tangible. Now I want to mention another thing. God gives them this project, as Rabbi Sachs calls it, to build the tabernacle, which they do with Bezalel ben Uri ben Hur, the architect. And they build the tabernacle, and they build the edifice, and they build the altars, and they build the various vessels. But an interesting thing is, it does not talk in these 4 parshiot about giving sacrifices in that tabernacle, of giving offerings. That's only the book of Leviticus. My argument is that even if you want to argue that the need for something tangible happens through the sanctuary, but the idea of the sacrifice and the offerings was not necessarily part of it, as Maimonides claims in his Guide for the Perplexed. In other words, it's only the book of Leviticus. And there in Leviticus, it is also presented as something that somebody needs when they sin. Their sin offerings, their guilt offerings, asham, chatat, they're offerings that are brought in the festivals. But basically, the offerings have this idea of penitence. But if you don't sin, you don't seem to need the offerings. There are daily offerings, I'm not saying no, but there seems to be this connection between offerings and the need for penitence and return and mending. So therefore, the offerings are not mentioned at all in the book of Exodus. You have the mentioning of this idea of you have a house of God where you can meet God, which means where you can be inspired, where you might even receive Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration. And in times of prophecy, maybe even prophecy. That's what the Talmud says about Jonah the prophet, that he received prophecy when he came to the temple during the festival of Sukkot, tabernacles. So for Shmot then, the end of the experience is reaching this point of a place where you can communicate with God, but it doesn't necessarily talk about the offerings, which have a different purpose. That purpose is brought in the book of Leviticus. And that need is because of Parshat Ki Tisa. Parshat Ki Tisa in the sense of the sin of the golden calf shouldn't have happened. And the penitence for that will be in Parsha and will be in Leviticus, in Vayikra, of what to do. But it shouldn't have happened. If you're following what I'm saying for a moment, there's an interesting structure in the book of Exodus, of Shmot. It goes 3, 3, and then 5, which you could actually claim as 4, because only 4 talk about building and executing the tabernacle, and Kitisa seems to be out of place. If we remove for a moment Kitisa, you have 3, 3, and 4, which is exactly the way the plagues happened on Egypt, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Ditzach Adash Be'achav, as we read in the Haggadah of Passover. So the first 3, the next 3, and then the final 4 become a structure of the whole book of Exodus. Just like the plagues were against Egypt, now you have 10 things which are building the Jewish people up. The 11th, Kitisa, should not have happened, but did. And therefore, we have to have a whole book talking about penitence, Vayikra, about this, and what a person does when they break the rules. So this is what I want to talk about, the structure. Exodus, the 3 legs of Israelite society, or at least beliefs, if you want to say, that have to be given at this point, which is that God's providence, the Decalogue, the basis of moral and spiritual life, and then, of course, the just society, which in that just society, people have to live as individuals, the moral and the spiritual life, and the temple, the connection to God, the place of prayer where you can actually connect to God. And of course, because Kitisa, just as the people have faults and the individuals have faults, you need the book of Leviticus, which really is about penitence. And also this is reiterated in the book of Devarim. These are some insights on the book of Shmot. Hope they were helpful. Shalom, shalom.